This is a piece that Mariam and I made specifically for the Cultural Center. We were thinking a lot about the piece that we made for the show at 6018, and thinking about how that piece was sort of compressed into the corner above the doorway and kind of functioned a bit like a periscope in some ways. Depending on where you stood in relation to it, it would sort of transport your point of view, either across the street or, give you this sort of chance to see behind you, so to speak. And the piece at 6018 was really about sort of stopping the visitor to the gallery in their tracks, so to speak, and sort of giving them a moment to sort of, I guess, consider the transition, the threshold, the space between things. I mean, I think that's what Mariam and I were really thinking about with the piece at 6018. But I think one of the things that we were struck with this site at the Cultural Center was that, you were walking through this doorway, and you were seeing the piece from all the way around. Like the piece at 6018 is very much almost like a stage set or a theater piece, because you only really see it from one point of view, even though the view that you see is sort of transporting the eye all around, right? So the eye is sort of dancing around this piece, but you're only really seeing it from one point of view. You walk up the steps, across the veranda into the house, and the piece kind of controls your view. But when you leave the house, there's really no sense that the piece is there until you're sort of conscious all of a sudden this thing above you. Maybe you turn around, then see your reflection. And so I think one of the things we were really struck by with this doorway is that it was this sort of space that was, you'd be seeing the piece from 2 points of view. You'd be passing through the doorway into the show, and you'd be exiting the show through the doorway. And so you'd be in this constant kind of space of movement. And so thinking about that, we really were thinking about, how does this piece occupy this liminality between these two spaces? How does it herald almost this crossing of this threshold into this very sort of special, vibrant space with all this work that all our colleagues had produced in some ways. But then also thinking about the sort of decorative quality of the space, the ornateness of it, the grandioseness of it, thinking about the patterning that was in the space. Immediately above where the piece is that whole ceiling with all those kind of inset things, and there's lots of kind of wave forms and whatnot. So there's a real sort of decorative ornament sense of flow, flowing into, flowing out of. And so I think partly Mariam and I were thinking about how the doorway, or the piece that we're making, should exist, between the two spaces, that it should be both in the space and out of the space, that it should draw the viewer in and also sort of propel them back out again.
There are more images, Jan, at the very end of this slide. Oh, there's another one.
That's a good one. Yeah, and that's a nice one too. I mean, I love the way that the piece becomes a little bit invisible, like it sort of disappears. And I love the way that it sort of takes space into it, and so it becomes this sort of, I mean, obviously it is a mirror, but it sort of drags or absorbs the architecture and the space into it. And I also love the way that it sort of floats there. It has that kind of weightlessness that we were striving for, that it sort of just was present there. Yeah, so I mean, I think that just thinking very much about this sort of sense of moving through the space, kind of heralding an entry point into a new space, thinking about this sort of notion of flux, right? Yeah, and just really, I don't know, making that sort of experience special in some ways, but yeah, but this whole notion of kind of this portal, this sort of space between the two things.